My name is Harmony, and just a few hours ago I finally understood what it means to hold a ghost in your hands. If you've ever felt like your voice was stolen, or that the world was trying to erase something you loved, then stick around. It helps to know I'm not just screaming into the void. This isn't just my story, it might be yours too. The story begins where most things do, with an ending, my grandmother's. She left me her bookstore, a place called The Last Page, and the name had become a bitter irony. It was drowning in debt, a multi-story mausoleum smelling of dust, decaying paper, and the ghost of forgotten tea. The town's most ruthless developer, a man named Silas Blackwood, had been circling like a vulture for months. He saw a prime piece of real estate on Main Street, a cornerstone for his next glass and steel monstrosity he planned to call the Spire. He'd offered me pennies on the dollar, his voice slick with a pity that was really just contempt. He'd told me, his smile all teeth, the land is more valuable than the worthless collection of old poetry books inside. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the books themselves were never the treasure. It was the ink in the margins. The treasure was the elegant, cramped handwriting, the corrections and sprawling notes signed with two simple initials, E.V., Elias Vance, the most famous, most reclusive author of the 20th century, a man who disappeared from public life 50 years ago and was rumored to have died in obscurity. He hadn't. He'd died right here, in this town, and he'd spent his last decade frequenting my grandmother's shop. What he left behind, scattered across nearly 100 volumes of poetry, was an entire unpublished manuscript. A lost masterpiece, hidden in plain sight, and I had just sent a high-resolution photograph of the first annotated page, a heavily edited first chapter titled The Alchemist of Dust, directly to the lead counsel of his literary estate's legal team. The subject line of the email was simple. It just said, regarding the estate of Elias Vance. Then I sat back in the creaking leather chair behind my grandmother's cluttered desk, the same chair she'd occupied for 50 years, and I waited for the world to change. The silence that followed was heavier than the dust. Every creak of the old building's floorboards sounded like a footstep. Every whisper of wind through the cracked window pane felt like a judgment. For the first 10 minutes after hitting send, a nauseating wave of doubt washed over me. What if they thought it was a hoax? A pathetic, desperate forgery from a girl trying to save her family's failing business? What if they just deleted the email, dismissing it as fan mail, or the ramblings of a crank? The weight of what I had just done, the sheer audacity of it, settled in my stomach like a cold, hard stone. I had wagered the last shred of my family's legacy on a ghost's handwriting. Silas Blackwood had given me a deadline, 48 hours, sign his insulting offer, or he'd start foreclosure proceedings. He'd made a deal with the bank, buying up my grandmother's debt for a fraction of its face value. It was a classic predatory move, and according to my small-town lawyer, it was perfectly legal. He owned me, and he knew it. His final words to me yesterday, delivered on the cracked pavement outside the store, still echoed in the quiet room. He'd looked from my face to the peeling paint on the doorframe and said, "Harmony, don't be sentimental, it's a business decision. Your grandmother ran this place into the ground with her romantic notions. Don't you make the same mistake." His words were designed to hurt, to sever the emotional cord that tied me to this place. And they had. They'd cut deep, but not in the way he intended. They hadn't made me want to let go. They had ignited a cold, burning rage that had been dormant for years. This bookstore wasn't just a business to me. It was the backdrop to my entire life, a place woven into the fabric of my earliest memories. I could close my eyes and be 5 years old again, sitting on a stack of encyclopedias in the history section. My grandmother, Eleanor, reading to me from a book of myths. Her voice was like warm honey, and the air smelled of paper and wood polish, not decay. She wasn't a failed businesswoman. She was a curator of worlds. She believed that every book had a soul, and that the right book would find the right person at the right time. She used to say, "We don't sell books, dear. We introduce friends." It was a beautiful philosophy, but it didn't pay the bills. As I got older, our relationship with the store became a point of contention. I went off to college, got a degree in business, and saw the world in spreadsheets and profit margins. Every time I came home, I saw the creeping neglect, the layer of dust growing thicker, the stacks of unpaid invoices on her desk. We argued about it. I remember one particularly bitter fight over Christmas dinner when I was 24. I'd presented her with a full business plan, a new inventory system, a coffee bar, an online storefront. I told her, "Grandma, you have to modernize. You have to adapt, or you will die." She had looked at me, her eyes filled with a profound sadness that I mistook for stubborn pride. She pushed the folder back across the table and said, "This place isn't a factory, Harmony. It's a sanctuary. You can't put a price on that. I had left that night feeling frustrated and self-righteous, convinced I knew better. I saw her as a relic, clinging to a past that was no longer viable. Now, sitting in her chair, surrounded by the evidence of her supposed failure, I felt a tidal wave of guilt. I hadn't understood. I had seen the decay, but I hadn't seen the reason for it. I thought she was neglecting the business, but she was protecting a secret. The days following her funeral were a blur of grief and paperwork. The lawyer laid out the grim reality of the store's finances. The debt was suffocating. Blackwood's initial offer felt less like an insult and more like an inevitability. My first week here was spent in a state of mourning, not just for my grandmother but for the store itself. I walked the aisles, my fingers trailing over the spines of books that hadn't been touched in years. The air was thick and stale, a physical manifestation of defeat. I started the heartbreaking task of sorting, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to throw away. It felt like a betrayal. I was doing exactly what I had criticized my grandmother for not doing, but I was doing it to dismantle her life's work, not to save it. I was preparing the body for burial. The first annotation I found was an accident. It was in a slim volume of Rilke, a book I'd picked up simply because the cover was a beautiful faded blue. Tucked away in a corner, next to a poem about solitude, was a handwritten note. It wasn't just a thought, it was a complete alternative stanza, written in a tight, elegant script. It was signed, simply, E.V. I paused. I knew those initials. Every literature student knew those initials. Elias Vance, the modern Salinger, a titan of letters who had published 3 monumental novels in the early 60s and then vanished completely. Theories about his disappearance were a cottage industry. He was living on a private island. He was in a monastery in Nepal. He was dead. I dismissed it at first. It had to be a coincidence, a flight of fancy from some long-forgotten customer named Evan or Evelyn. I put the book on the desk and continued my grim work, but a seed had been planted. A few days later, I was clearing out the philosophy section, a particularly dusty corner that smelled faintly of my grandmother's lavender perfume. I found another one, this time in a heavy tome of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Next to a passage about enduring hardship, there was a long, sprawling commentary, not about stoicism, but about a character, a man named Arthur, who built clocks that could measure not time, but regret. The handwriting was identical to the note in the Rilke book. It was signed E.V. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was different. This wasn't a comment. It was a piece of a story, a fragment of a world. I dropped the other books I was holding and ran back to the desk. I grabbed the Rilke. I compared the 2 signatures, the 2 scripts. They were a perfect match. A frantic energy seized me. I was no longer clearing out a bookstore. I was on a scavenger hunt. I abandoned any pretense of organization and started pulling books from the shelves at random, my hands covered in a fine gray dust. I looked for books that seemed out of place, books with worn covers and cracked spines. My grandmother, I realized, hadn't been a poor inventory manager. She had been a librarian for a single, secret patron. She had been curating a collection for him. I found the next one in a book on celestial navigation, then in a biography of Marie Curie, then in a tattered copy of Moby Dick. Each one contained another piece of the puzzle. Notes, dialogues, entire paragraphs. A story was emerging, not in a linear fashion, but in scattered, brilliant fragments. It was a story about a man who inherits a dusty workshop filled with his grandfather's strange, unfinished inventions. A story about memory, loss, and the magic hidden in forgotten things. It was, I realized with a dizzying lurch, a story about me, or rather, a story that was now my reality. This was the subplot I needed to dig into to meet the word count, the human element. My grandmother wasn't just hoarding books, she was helping one of the greatest writers of her generation complete his final work. She was his confidante, his collaborator in silence. All those years I thought she was failing. She was engaged in the most profound success of her life. She was protecting the artist, not the business. The arguments we'd had, the frustration I'd felt, it all replayed in my mind, but this time colored by a deep, aching shame. She couldn't tell me her secret. How could she? The moment she did, the sanctuary would be compromised. The magic would be gone. This wasn't just about Elias Vance anymore. It was about my grandmother, Eleanor. Vindicating her wasn't just about proving the books had value, it was about proving her life's work had a purpose. I had been too blind to see. This resolve hardened inside me. It pushed away the grief and the doubt and replaced it with a cold, clear focus. Blackwood saw a derelict building on a valuable piece of land. I saw a treasure chest, and my grandmother had left me the key. The first step was to understand the scope of what I had. For the next 3 weeks, I lived in the bookstore. I slept on an old couch in the back office, sustained by coffee and delivery pizza. The world outside, with its deadlines and developers, ceased to exist. My world was the one contained within these 4 walls. I began a meticulous process. I created a spreadsheet, just like the one I had proposed to my grandmother all those years ago. But this one wasn't for inventory or sales. It was for cataloging a masterpiece. Each entry had the book title, the author, the page number of the annotation, a photograph of the note, and a transcription. The task was monumental. There were thousands of books in the store. How could I find them all? I almost gave up a dozen times. Then I remembered my grandmother's peculiar filing system. She had a set of old oak card catalogs, the kind you'd find in a library from the 1950s. I had always thought it was another sign of her refusal to modernize. I'd offered to buy her a computer, a barcode scanner. She had just smiled and patted the oak cabinet. She said, "This system has a soul, harmony. It knows things a computer can't." I had rolled my eyes. Now I opened one of the drawers, labeled PR. I pulled out the card for Rilke. On the back, in my grandmother's familiar looping cursive, was a tiny, almost invisible pencil mark. A small 5-pointed star. My breath caught in my throat. I ran to the philosophy section and pulled the drawer for M. I found the card for Marcus Aurelius. It had the same star. It wasn't a filing system. It was a map. My grandmother had marked every single book that contained a piece of Vance's hidden novel. She had left me a guide. A quiet wave of emotion washed over me. Even after she was gone, she was helping me. She had known somehow that I would need this, that I would be the one to put the pieces together. The guilt I felt began to transform into a profound sense of connection, a silent conversation with her ghost across time. She hadn't just left me a problem to solve, she had left me a purpose. The hunt accelerated. Armed with the map, I moved through the store with a new feverish energy. I found a star on the card for a book about the history of locks. Inside, a detailed description of an impossible key. I found a star on a book of Japanese folklore. Inside, a conversation between 2 characters about the nature of ghosts. I found 97 stars in total, 97 books, scattered throughout every section of the store. They were a constellation of genius, and my grandmother was the astronomer who had charted them. As I transcribed the final note, a heartbreakingly beautiful passage about letting go, found in a children's picture book about a lost bear. I sat back, staring at the mountain of data I had compiled. I had it, the entire book, not in order, but every single word. Reconstructing it would be an academic's life's work. But I had the raw material, the DNA of a lost giant. That was when I realized that saving the bookstore wasn't enough. Proving Blackwood wrong wasn't enough. This wasn't about a small victory anymore. It was about resurrecting a legend, and in doing so, giving my grandmother's legacy the tribute it deserved. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that. It was about justice. A justice that was quiet and patient and had been waiting on these dusty shelves for 50 years. The plan began to form, not as a single brilliant idea, but as a series of logical, sequential steps. I had the raw data, but it was a chaotic jumble of images and transcriptions. It was evidence, but it wasn't a case. I knew my business degree and spreadsheet skills weren't going to be enough. I needed an ally, someone who understood the world of academia and literary history, someone who could see the ghost I was seeing and not think I was insane. My mind immediately went to Leo. Leo Martinez was a fixture at the small cafe next to the bookstore. He was a PhD candidate in history at the local university, a perpetually exhausted but brilliant young man who seemed to be surgically attached to his laptop. He and my grandmother had been friends. She'd let him run a tab, which he paid off by helping her move heavy boxes of books. He'd come to the funeral and had looked as lost as I felt. He was my first and only choice. I found him at his usual corner table, surrounded by a fortress of books. I bought him a coffee, slid into the chair opposite him, and pushed my own laptop across the table. I said, "Leo, I need to show you something, and I need you to promise me you'll keep an open mind." He looked at me, his eyes tired but curious. He nodded. I opened the file. I showed him the first picture, the annotated page from the Rilke book. His brow furrowed. He leaned in closer. "That's a beautiful script," he said. "Whose is it?" I told him. I said, "I think it's Elias Vance." A flicker of academic interest lit up his eyes, but it was quickly followed by skepticism. "Harmony," he said gently. "People have been finding lost Vance material for decades. It's always a fake." "I know," I said, "but just look at this one." I showed him the note from the Marcus Aurelius book. then the one from the book on locks, then another, and another. With each new image, his skepticism melted away, replaced by a wide-eyed, electric excitement. He wasn't just looking at text anymore. He was a historian witnessing the discovery of a primary source. He started firing questions. The paper, the ink, the handwriting consistency. He pulled a small magnifying glass from his bag and started examining the script on my screen, zooming in, comparing the loop of the G's, the cross of the T's. This is consistent, he whispered, almost to himself. Frighteningly consistent. For the next week, Leo practically moved into the bookstore. He brought his own scanner, a high-end piece of equipment from the university library that he'd borrowed indefinitely. Together we were a two-person operation, a secret society dedicated to one man's ghost. Leo provided the academic rigor I lacked. He found handwriting samples from Vance's few known letters, stored in university archives, and ran a comparative analysis. The match was, in his words, statistically undeniable. He researched the types of pens and ink that were common in the last decade of Vance's life. He even did a chemical analysis, or rather, he had a friend in the chemistry department do it, on a tiny flake of ink from one of the margins. Everything lined up. While he focused on authentication, I focused on the narrative. I printed out every single transcribed note and laid them out on the floor of the main reading area. The entire central space of the bookstore became a mosaic of a broken story. We spent hours on our hands and knees, moving slips of paper around, trying to piece the plot together. It was like assembling the world's most complicated, most meaningful jigsaw puzzle. We started to see the structure. The story of Arthur, the builder of clocks that measured regret, the introduction of a woman named Clara, a cartographer who mapped not places but memories. A villain, a man who sought to acquire and dismantle Arthur's workshop for his own mundane purposes. The parallels to my own situation were so stark, it was almost painful. It felt like Vance, or my grandmother, or both, had left me a blueprint for my own survival. Our alliance was built on a shared sense of purpose and too much cheap coffee. Leo was the first person who didn't look at me with pity. He didn't see a grieving granddaughter in over her head. He saw a fellow discoverer. He saw the treasure for what it was. One night, sitting on the floor surrounded by paper, he looked up at me, his eyes shining. "Do you realize what this is, Harmony?" he asked. "This isn't just a lost novel. It's a complete departure from his previous work. His other books were cynical, almost bleak. This one is about hope. It's about finding magic in the broken things. It's his masterpiece." It was in that moment that I understood the true weight of my responsibility. This wasn't about money. I kept repeating that to myself, a mantra to keep my focus pure. It wasn't about revenge against Silas Blackwood. It was about fulfilling the final wish of a great artist and honoring the woman who had made it possible. The plan solidified. Authentication was the first step. Reconstruction was the second. The third, and most critical, was the approach. We couldn't just shout this from the rooftops. The world would descend, a storm of media and opportunists. We had to be strategic. We had to be surgical. Leo's research skills were invaluable. He spent 2 days digging into the legal structure of the Elias Vance literary estate. It was a notoriously private and aggressive entity, managed by a top-tier New York law firm. They had spent the last 50 years suing anyone who even breathed on Vance's copyright. They were dragons guarding a hoard of gold. A direct, unsolicited approach was risky. They could try to claim the manuscript, bury it in litigation, and leave me with nothing but legal bills. We needed to find the right person inside that fortress. Not just a lawyer, but a person who would understand the story behind the story. Leo found her. Her name was Anya Sharma. She wasn't the head of the firm, but she was the lead counsel specifically for the Vance estate. She had written her law school thesis on the intellectual property rights of reclusive artists. Her online profile included a quote, "Our job is not just to protect the work, but to honor the intent of the creator." She was the one. Now came the most delicate part, crafting the first contact. We couldn't send everything. That would be giving away all our leverage. We needed to send just enough to be undeniable, but not enough for them to steal. A single, perfect hook. We chose the first page of the novel, which we had painstakingly pieced together. It was the chapter titled The Alchemist of Dust, and it was annotated in the margins of a copy of Homer's The Odyssey. The page was a work of art in itself, a tapestry of crossed-out words, rewritten sentences, and sprawling notes. It was chaotic, intimate, and undeniably the work of a genius in the throes of creation. I took the photo myself, using a high-resolution camera Leo borrowed from the university's art department. I made sure the lighting was perfect. capturing the texture of the old paper, the fade of the book's original print, and the stark, black confidence of Vance's ink. The email itself was a masterpiece of brevity and precision, drafted and redrafted a dozen times by Leo and me. It was polite, professional, and gave away nothing about my personal situation. It simply stated my name, my connection to the bookstore my grandmother owned in a small town Vance was known to have visited, and the fact that I had come into possession of what I believed to be significant, unpublished literary material. I attached the single image. I listed my phone number. Before I hit send, I looked at Leo. My hand was shaking. "Are we sure about this?" I asked. "This is the point of no return." Leo looked from my face to the screen. He nodded, his expression firm. "My grandmother used to say the right book finds the right person. Harmony, I think this book just found you, and now you have to introduce it to its family." Blackwood's 48-hour deadline was set to expire the next day at noon. I took a deep breath. I thought of my grandmother's quiet strength, of her secret dedication. I thought of the story on the floor, of Arthur and his clocks of regret. This wasn't about revenge. It was about resetting the clock. I hit send. The sound of the outgoing email was a quiet click that echoed in the cavernous silence of the store like a gunshot. The secret was out. The plan was in motion. Now all we could do was wait for the dragons to respond. The waiting was a unique form of torture. The 24 hours after sending that email stretched into an eternity. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped into my throat, only for it to be a news alert or a spam text. Leo and I sat in the dusty office, drinking stale coffee and trying to pretend we weren't terrified. Blackwood had called twice. I let it go to voicemail. His messages were dripping with false concern. "Harmony, just calling to check in. I hope you're making the sensible choice. Remember, my offer expires tomorrow at noon. It's the best you're going to get." He sounded so sure of himself, so confident in his power. He thought he was closing in for the kill. He had no idea I had just launched a weapon he couldn't even conceive of. At 9:15 the next morning, my phone rang. The caller ID was a New York area code. My hand trembled as I answered. "Harmony speaking." The voice on the other end was female, crisp, and radiated an authority that felt like it could cut glass. "Ms. Harmony Jones, this is Anya Sharma. I am lead counsel for the estate of Elias Vance. I received your email. I'm calling to inform you that I am currently on a jet, and I will be landing at your county airport in approximately 3 hours. Please do not speak to anyone else about this matter. Do not move the materials. Do not let anyone into the bookstore. A car will be sent to bring you to the airport to meet me. Is that understood?" I was so stunned I could barely form a sentence. I managed a quiet, "Yes, that's understood." She didn't say goodbye. She just hung up. The line went dead, leaving a dial tone that sounded louder than a scream. Leo, who had been listening on speakerphone, just stared at me, his mouth agape. "A jet?" he whispered. "She's on a jet." The silent takeover had begun, and it had started with an earthquake. The sheer speed of the response was what shocked us. We had expected weeks of correspondence, letters from junior associates, skepticism, and legal posturing. Instead, we got the head counsel on a private jet within 12 hours of sending one email. It meant one thing. They knew. The single photograph was enough. The handwriting was so distinctive, so legendary within their small private world that there was no doubt. We didn't have a potential discovery. We had the real thing. The next few hours were a blur of frantic preparation. We tidied up the main floor, hiding the scattered pages of our reconstructed manuscript. We made a fresh pot of coffee. It felt absurd, like cleaning the house before a hurricane makes landfall. True to her word, a black town car, the kind you only see in movies, pulled up in front of the dilapidated bookstore precisely 2.5 hours later. The driver, a man built like a refrigerator, got out and opened the door for me. Leo stayed behind to guard our fortress. As the car pulled away, I saw Silas Blackwood's own car, a shiny black Mercedes, parked across the street. He was watching. He must have seen the fancy car arrive. A small, cold knot of satisfaction tightened in my chest. Let him watch. Let him wonder. The ride to the small county airport was silent. I watched my town roll by, the familiar storefronts, the town square. It felt like I was seeing it from a great distance. When we arrived, the car didn't go to the main terminal. It drove straight out onto the tarmac, toward a sleek white private jet that looked like it had landed from another planet. The jet's door was open, the stairs already down. A woman stood at the top. Anya Sharma was exactly as I had pictured her, only more so. She was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark gray suit, with an aura of focused, intelligent energy that was palpable, even from 50 feet away. She didn't wait for me to climb the stairs. She descended to meet me on the tarmac. Her handshake was firm, her eyes analytical. They scanned my face, the bookstore behind me in the distance, and then settled on me with an intensity that was unnerving. "Thank you for coming, Miss Jones," she said, her voice the same as on the phone. "Shall we go to the bookstore? I have brought a preliminary authentication team." She gestured to the jet, and two people, a man and a woman in conservative business attire, descended with silver briefcases. They were, I learned, one of the world's top handwriting analysts and a conservation expert from the Morgan Library. Blackwood's noon deadline was now just 30 minutes away. The ride back to the store was a master class in controlled efficiency. Anya asked pointed, precise questions. "When did you find the first book? How did you identify the others? Who else knows about this?" I told her everything, about my grandmother, the card catalog with the star system, my partnership with Leo. I was careful to frame it not as a desperate attempt to save a business, but as a methodical process of literary discovery. She listened without expression, her face a perfect mask of professional neutrality. But I saw a flicker in her eyes when I mentioned the star system, a flicker of respect. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," she said. We pulled up to the store. Blackwood was now standing on the sidewalk across the street, talking on his phone, his face a thundercloud of confusion and anger. He saw our procession, the black car, the lawyer, the experts with their silver cases, and his jaw tightened. The power dynamic of our small town had just been shattered. The moment we stepped inside, Anya's team went to work. Leo, to his credit, handled the interrogation with academic poise, showing them his research, the handwriting comparisons, the ink analysis. They were impressed. The lead authenticator, a stern-looking man named Dr. Alistair Finch, examined the first book I showed him, the Rilke, under a portable digital microscope. He spent 10 minutes in complete silence, staring at a screen connected to the device. Finally, he looked up at Anya. His voice was hushed with reverence. "It's him. There is no question. It's Vance." Anya Sharma finally allowed herself a small, thin smile. It was a smile of victory. It was in that exact moment that my phone rang. It was Blackwood. I looked at Anya. She nodded. I put it on speaker. "Harmony," his voice was tight, strained. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but my offer expires in 5 minutes. Sign the papers, or I'm calling the bank." His voice was the bluster of a man who senses his power slipping away but doesn't know why. Anya stepped forward, took the phone from my hand, and spoke into it. Her voice was calm, cold, and utterly dominant. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "my name is Anya Sharma. I represent the estate of Elias Vance. It has come to our attention that you are attempting to acquire this property through predatory means, a property which we now have reason to believe contains intellectual property worth, conservatively, 8 figures. Any further contact with my client, Miss Jones, will be considered harassment. Any attempt to proceed with foreclosure will be met with an immediate countersuit for tortious interference that will tie up you and your company in litigation for the next decade. Do I make myself clear?" There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears in his brain grinding to a halt, trying to process the words 8 figures and litigation. He stammered something incoherent, a mix of bluster and confusion. "Who is this? What are you talking about? Books aren't worth." Anya didn't let him finish. "I believe I was perfectly clear, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. "We will be in touch." She hung up. She handed the phone back to me. Her eyes met mine. "The panic," she said, "is the first sign that you've won. Let's get to work securing the assets." The silent takeover was complete. The king was dead, even if he didn't know it yet. The real work, the work of building a new kingdom, had just begun. The aftermath of that phone call was like the quiet, ozone-filled air after a lightning strike. The immediate threat of Silas Blackwood had been neutralized, not with a bang, but with a few perfectly chosen, legally devastating sentences. His power, which had seemed so absolute just hours before, was revealed to be a fragile facade built on bullying and the assumption of his victim's weakness. Anya Sharma and her team were a force of nature. They transformed the dusty, quiet bookstore into a high-security level operating base. They worked with a quiet, focused intensity that was both terrifying and exhilarating to watch. The conservation expert began carefully bagging and tagging each of the 97 books, treating them not as old paperbacks but as priceless artifacts. Dr. Finch, the handwriting expert, continued his meticulous verification process, cross-referencing every single annotation with his database of Vance's known writing. There was no longer any doubt about the manuscript's authenticity, but Anya was building an ironclad case, leaving no room for challenge. In the midst of this whirlwind of activity, I felt a strange sense of calm. The weight of the store's fate was no longer solely on my shoulders. I had found allies, powerful ones, who saw the same value in this place that I did. But this victory brought a new, more complex set of problems. The manuscript was real. Its value was astronomical. But who did it belong to? The physical books were mine, a gift from my grandmother. But the words written in their margins, they belonged to the ghost of Elias Vance, and by extension, to the estate Anya represented. I was sitting on a treasure chest that I had found, but I didn't own its contents. This was the moment where my own debatable logic came into play. I could have tried to fight them. I could have claimed some sort of ownership, hired my own lawyer, and entered a protracted legal battle that would have made me rich but would have betrayed the entire spirit of the discovery. People might say I should have fought for every penny. They'd say I was a fool not to. But sitting there watching them treat my grandmother's books with such reverence, I knew that wasn't the path. It wasn't about the money. It was about honoring the story. Anya must have sensed my internal conflict. That evening, after her team had secured the first batch of books in climate-controlled cases they'd had flown in, she asked me to walk with her. We stepped out of the bookstore and into the cool night air of Main Street. The lights of the town seemed softer now, less harsh. "So, what do you want, Harmony?" she asked, her tone shifting from legal counsel to something more personal. I took a deep breath. "I want to save the store," I said. "I want my grandmother's legacy to be honored. I want people to read his book." Anya nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the front window of the last page. "The Vance estate is not known for its generosity," she said. "We are protectors, first and foremost. We could litigate this for years. We could argue that your grandmother was merely a custodian of the work, and that the intellectual property reverts entirely to us. We would likely win." It was a statement of fact, not a threat. "And what do you think?" I asked. "I think," she said, turning to look at me, "that Elias Vance chose your grandmother. He chose this place. For 50 years he avoided the world, avoided publishers, avoided people like me, but he didn't avoid Eleanor Jones. There's a story there that's not in the manuscript, and the estate has a vested interest in preserving that story. It's part of his legacy now." She paused, then laid out her proposal. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a vision. The estate would formally acquire the intellectual property of the unpublished novel, which they were already tentatively calling The Alchemist of Dust. In exchange, they would not only pay off the bookstore's entire debt, but would also provide a substantial finder's fee and a lifetime annuity to me. But that was just the financial part. The real offer was this. They wanted to partner with me. They wanted to pour millions into renovating the last page, transforming it from a dusty relic into a world-class literary landmark. A working bookstore, a museum dedicated to Vance's final years, and a center for a new foundation promoting reclusive and outsider artists. And they wanted me to run it. I would be the director and curator. It was everything I had ever wanted, a future I couldn't have even dared to dream of just a week ago. I didn't have to think about it. I just said yes. The next morning, the power shift became public. The Vance estate, in a move of coordinated legal and public relations brilliance, issued a press release. It was picked up instantly by every major news outlet in the world. Lost Final Novel, by reclusive genius Elias Vance, discovered in small-town bookstore. My name was in the first paragraph, my grandmother's name was in the second. The story of her quiet guardianship of Vance's secret was the heart of the narrative. Suddenly, my grandmother wasn't a failed business owner. She was a literary hero. The last page wasn't a worthless, decaying building. It was a site of historical significance. The news hit our small town like a tidal wave. My phone exploded with calls and texts from people I hadn't heard from in years. The cafe next door was swamped with reporters. A satellite truck from a national news network parked across the street, right in the spot where Blackwood's Mercedes used to sit. The client exodus, in this case, wasn't from a company. It was an exodus of public opinion away from Silas Blackwood. He had wanted to build the Spire, a monument to his own ego. He had dismissed the bookstore as a pile of worthless junk. Now that junk was the biggest cultural story of the year, and he was the villain in the first chapter. He became a local pariah overnight. The town council, which had been greasing the wheels for his development project, suddenly grew a collective conscience. They announced a review of his permits. His funding partners, spooked by the negative press and the looming threat of the Vance estate's legal team, started pulling out. His empire was crumbling, and all I had done was send one email. He made one last desperate move. He called me again. This time his voice was completely different. There was no condescension, no false pity. There was only raw, undisguised panic. "Harmony, Silas here. Listen, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I've been thinking, and that collection of books, it's clearly very special. I'm prepared to make you a new offer. A real offer. I'll buy the entire collection from you, right now, cash. Name your price. It was the desperate gambit of a man who still thought everything had a price tag. He thought he could buy his way out of the hole he had dug for himself. He didn't understand. It was never about the money. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, enjoying the sound of his ragged breathing. Then I said, calmly and quietly, "I'm sorry, Silas. The books aren't for sale." And I hung up. That was the last time I ever heard his voice. The power had not just shifted, it had been completely transferred. He had wanted to buy the land, and in the end he had lost everything because he had never bothered to look at what was sitting on it. The final confrontation wasn't what I expected. There was no dramatic boardroom scene, no shouting match. It happened a week later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Silas Blackwood simply appeared at the entrance of the bookstore. He looked like a different man. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face was pale, and the arrogant confidence in his eyes had been replaced by a hollowed-out exhaustion. He didn't try to come in. The front door was now manned by a polite but firm security guard provided by the estate. He just stood on the sidewalk, looking in. Anya and I were inside, going over the architectural plans for the renovation. She saw him first, and put a hand on my arm. "Do you want to speak to him?" she asked. For a moment I considered just ignoring him, letting him stand there as a monument to his own failure. But that didn't feel right. That felt like his kind of victory, not mine. I walked to the door. I stepped outside, letting the door close behind me. He flinched, as if he expected me to yell at him. I just waited. "It's a nice day," I said, my voice even. He looked up at the sky, confused. Then he looked back at me, his shoulders slumped. "I'm ruined," he said. It wasn't an apology, it was just a statement of fact. His investors were gone. The town had turned against him. His reputation was shattered. "I know," I said. He seemed to be waiting for something more. For me to gloat, to lecture him, to tell him he got what he deserved. I thought about all the things I could say. I could have thrown his own words back in his face. I could have talked about sentimental, romantic notions. But what was the point? He was already a ghost, haunting the place he had tried to destroy. Instead, I thought of the manuscript. I thought of Arthur, the clockmaker, and his machines that measured regret. I thought of a line from the final chapter, a line that Leo and I had decided was the heart of the entire book. "There was a passage in one of the books," I said quietly, "a note from Mr. Vance. It said, 'A man who only values the land will never understand the treasure buried beneath it.'" Blackwood just stared at me. He didn't understand the reference, but he understood the meaning. He understood that he had lost because of a fundamental failure of imagination. He had seen a box, and he had never, not once, thought to look inside. He turned without another word and walked away. I never saw him again. A month later, I read in the local paper that he had declared bankruptcy and left town. His removal was quiet, a footnote in the much bigger story that was now unfolding. The new reality began to take shape. The renovation of the last page was a beautiful thing to watch. The best architects, the best craftspeople, all funded by the Vance estate, descended on the store. They didn't gut it, they healed it. They restored the original woodwork, reinforced the old shelves, and installed a state-of-the-art climate control system to protect the remaining collection. The second floor was transformed into a stunning museum, with the 97 books displayed in illuminated glass cases, open to the pages where Elias Vance had written his final words. The centerpiece was a tribute to my grandmother, Eleanor, with a large photo of her smiling behind the old front desk, and a plaque that told the story of her silent, loyal friendship. I found my new throne not in a corner office, but right back where she had been, behind that same desk, which had been beautifully restored. I sat there on the first day of the grand reopening, the air smelling not of dust and decay, but of fresh paint, lemon oil, and the crisp, clean scent of new books. The store was filled with people, with chatter, with life. Leo was there, now officially a paid consultant for the estate. Anya was there, smiling a rare, genuine smile. It wasn't about revenge. I thought the words, and for the first time, I think I truly believed them. It was about restoration. It was about taking something broken and making it whole again. It was vindication, not just for me, but for my grandmother, and for the quiet ghost who had found his final sanctuary among her dusty shelves. The final, symbolic piece of my new life clicked into place a week after the reopening. A package arrived from Anya's office in New York. Inside, nestled in silk paper, was a book. It was the very first published edition of The Alchemist of Dust by Elias Vance. The cover was a deep midnight blue, with a simple, elegant title in gold leaf. I opened it. On the dedication page, there were only 2 words, for Eleanor. A wave of emotion, so pure and overwhelming, washed over me. I ran my fingers over her name, printed there for the world to see. Her legacy wasn't just saved, it was immortalized. This book was her true headstone, more lasting than any piece of granite. Later that day, I took the original insulting offer letter from Silas Blackwood, the one offering me pennies for this place, and I framed it. I didn't hang it in the main museum for everyone to see. That would be too crass. I hung it in my small private office in the back, right next to a picture of my grandmother. It's a reminder that the world will often tell you what something is worth, but it's up to you to know its true value. It's not a trophy of my victory over him, it's a testament to my grandmother's quiet defiance. And now, I want to talk to you, the person listening to this right now. Maybe you're in a job where your boss takes credit for your work. Maybe you're in a situation where you feel overlooked, underestimated, or completely erased. Maybe you have a dream that everyone around you calls worthless or a sentimental notion. This story, my story, is not about a lost manuscript or a villainous developer. It's about the hidden value in the things people discard. It's about the quiet strength it takes to protect something precious when the world is telling you to let it go. Your worthless collection of old books might be a business plan you wrote that's sitting in a drawer. It might be a talent you have that your company doesn't value. It might be a relationship you're nurturing that others see as a waste of time. Don't let their lack of imagination define your reality. Don't let their spreadsheets determine your worth. The world is full of Silas Blackwoods, people who only see the land and never the treasure beneath it. Your job is to be an Eleanor, be a guardian, be a protector of the magic that only you can see. And when the time is right, when you've gathered your evidence and found your allies, you send the email, you make the call, you take the picture, you reveal the truth you've been protecting. It's not about revenge, it's about reclamation. It's about reminding the world, and more importantly, reminding yourself, of what is truly valuable. Your story matters, your work matters, you matter. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the underdog, please do me a favor and hit that like button. It truly helps, and it lets me know that these stories are finding the right people. Leave a comment below, and tell me about a time you found value where no one else saw it. I read every single one, and if you want to hear more stories about vindication and quiet victories, make sure you subscribe to the channel and share this with someone who might need to hear it today. Until next time, remember to look in the margins. That's where the real stories are hidden.